In the year 1861, the United States found itself on the precipice of destruction. This was no minor dispute, no fleeting disagreement. It was a fracturing of a nation born less than a century earlier, a nation that had declared itself to be a beacon of liberty and justice. But that promise, that vision, was clouded by the shadow of slavery, economic disparity, and an unresolved question: should the United States be a collection of states bound loosely by shared purpose, or a single, unified nation under a strong central government? This question demanded an answer, and the cost of finding it would be immense. Let us begin with the roots of this great conflict. The story of the American Civil War begins not with the shots fired in 1861, but in the centuries preceding it. The North and the South had diverged culturally, economically, and politically. The northern states, industrialized, urbanized, were building an economy rooted in manufacturing and infrastructure, while the southern states relied deeply and tragically on agriculture, sustained by the inhumane institution of slavery. To the South, slavery was not just an economic engine, it was a way of life, deeply entrenched, morally justified by their interpretations of scripture and tradition. To the North, however, an abolitionist movement was growing, propelled by ideals of equality, liberty, and the simple recognition of human dignity. But it wasn't only slavery that caused the divide. It was a broader clash over power and autonomy. States' rights, the South argued, gave them the freedom to determine their own laws, free from federal interference. This included, of course, the institution of slavery, but to the federal government, unity was paramount. Balancing these tensions proved impossible. The election of 1860 shattered the delicate status quo. Abraham Lincoln, whose campaign explicitly opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, was elected president. The South saw this as not merely a political defeat, but as an existential threat. And so, 11 southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America under President Jefferson Davis. Now for the sound of war, the thunder of cannon fire at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. April 12, 1861, marked the beginning of the Civil War. Confederate forces attacked the Union garrison, forcing their surrender. This wasn't just a symbolic event. It unleashed a torrent of battles, strategies, and sacrifices that would scar the country deeply. Let us turn to the battlefield. Each battle tells a story of resilience, tragedy, and turning points. There was the First Battle of Bull Run, where naive assumptions of a quick, decisive Union victory were shattered. Onlookers who picnicked nearby expecting light entertainment were instead faced with the raw brutality of war. Then, by 1863, came one of the most pivotal moments in American history: the Battle of Gettysburg. Picture this: a small town in Pennsylvania, rolling hills and farmlands. It became the site of ghastly carnage and perhaps the Union's great hope. For 3 days, over 165,000 soldiers clashed. Confederate General Robert E. Lee hoped for a decisive blow that would force the Union to negotiate peace, but Union forces held firm. The final tally: over 50,000 casualties. President Lincoln would later stand at that battlefield to deliver the now famous Gettysburg Address, reminding the American people that this conflict was not just about survival, but about a new birth of freedom. While Gettysburg was a turning point, its impact was amplified by another brutal campaign: General Sherman's March to the Sea. In 1864, Sherman led Union forces from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia, executing a scorched earth policy that horrified the South. Buildings, railroads, crops, the infrastructure of the South's war effort were set ablaze. The psychological toll was profound. The Confederacy's resources were literally burned to ashes, leaving its people drained and desperate. We must highlight one critical document: the Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Lincoln on January 1, 1863. While not ending slavery outright, it declared all enslaved people in Confederate states to be free. This shifted the war's purpose. No longer was it only about preserving the Union. It was also undeniably about ending slavery, echoing Lincoln's belief that freedom and equality were fundamental to the nation's values. And now, imagine the end of it all. After 4 years of grueling conflict, over 600,000 lives lost, towns ravaged, and families torn apart, the war concluded. At Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865, Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant. It was a somber moment. Grant's terms of surrender were generous, allowing Confederate soldiers to return home with dignity. But the war's conclusion was only the beginning of a long and difficult road to healing. America emerged victorious, but it was battered and forever changed. The Union's victory ensured that the United States would remain one nation. More importantly, slavery, the moral and social blight it was abolished through the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Yet, Reconstruction was a painful, challenging process. Though slavery was abolished, true equality remained elusive, and to this day, the fight for civil rights continues. Reconstruction saw formerly Confederate states working to reintegrate with the Union politically and economically, and attempting to redefine themselves in a United States no longer tethered to slavery. President Lincoln, tragically, would not live to see this process through. He was assassinated just 6 days after the war's official end. But let us reflect on the legacy of the Civil War. Beyond the headlines of battles and proclamations lies a profound transformation. The notion of liberty and equality, cherished principles enshrined in the Declaration of Independence but not fully realized, was propelled forward. The Civil War tested America's soul, and the sacrifices made ensured not just survival, but progress, however slow and painful. As we look back on this period, we're reminded of how far the nation has come and how much work remains. The sacrifices made in those 4 brutal years were immense. Soldiers, civilians, politicians, they all endured profound suffering. But from that suffering emerged a stronger nation, armed with the determination to move closer to its ideals. The Civil War was not merely a fight between the North and the South, between blue and gray uniforms. It was a fight between competing visions for what America should be. A fight to unify a fragmented identity into something stronger. And ultimately, it was a fight for freedom. The freedom not just of the enslaved, but the freedom of an entire nation to move toward its better self. Thank you for exploring this pivotal chapter in history with us. If you found this journey insightful, be sure to share it, like this video, and subscribe for more in-depth stories from history.